Welcome to the CTO2CTO podcast, where Chief Technology Officers dig into the challenges and opportunities that leaders face every day at the intersection of business and innovation. I'm your host, Lucas Hendricks, CTO at Forte Group.
So, welcome to the CTO2CTO podcast. Bienvenidos al podcast CTO2CTO. Primera vez en español. Tenemos el gran honor, we have the great honor to have with us the CTO of Louis Vuitton, Chris Penido. Mm-hmm. And we're just thrilled to have you here. One of the themes of this podcast is the CTO means a lot of different things. And being a CTO, founder CTO in a startup, or CTO in a mid-market PE-backed company, or CTO in a large enterprise or a large retail enterprise are all totally different things. At least that's what we observe. So it's really great to have someone, I think, from a totally different, I think of all the episodes, on the one hand, from a brand that's so well recognized, but on the other hand, a very large enterprise operating in 70 countries. So it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Along the same lines of, let's say, multidisciplinary backgrounds, it's not the first time I've shared in this podcast that my background isn't very traditional for a CTO. And yours as well is, I'd say, closer to mine in terms of being non-traditional. So liberal arts background, studied Romance languages and literature. So I'm really curious about that journey. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious about what particular insights that has given you, and then where have you, when I think about, it's not overcompensating, but where have you felt like you've had to kind of, learn yourself or find ways to kind of, make up for not having a technical background and those challenges, which I like to talk about openly because it's surprisingly a very common theme. Mm-hmm. That people arrive in, executive roles in technology with these backgrounds that are wildly diverse, from, physics to molecular biology to Romance language. So
I hope I'm going to remember all of that, but I will. So again, hi, my name is Christopher Penido, CTO at Louis Vuitton, and I've been there for almost now 13 years. And to answer your question, how did I get here? To be honest, I didn't even know if I could get here. I probably would not have bet that I would have gotten here, even if I wanted to, knowing what I went to school for, what I was really gunning for as a kid, growing up in New York City, growing up in Queens, Jamaica, Queens in particular, opportunities like this always seemed like it was outside the realm of possibility. You would always see it on TV, you would hear about it, but you never thought that you could actually be it. And sometimes you would think that you need to settle for less and kind of leave that in the back of your mind and kind of, strive for it one day in your own way. But over time, I realized that I don't have to settle for that. That in fact, if I truly worked hard towards the goal, if I stayed with that mindset of being like too school for cool, in a way, definitely made high school very challenging. Being a Star Trek nerd and all these other things that nerd fandom would probably tell you, you are going to be typecast like that for the rest of your life. But it actually was a good foundation because, being in that mindset of being a futurist and thinking about technology, thinking about a better world that through technology, through collaboration, it ironically propelled me further down that path. So, when I was in high school, you don't know what you want to do. You just know you take a language class here and there. I got stuck in French because I was not allowed to take Spanish because that would potentially be too much of an easy grade. And of course, I hated it, French for sure.
But you pronounce Louis Vuitton in a very
yes, that I did. Yes,
impeccably.
That I did. And I was always been in that situation of making lemons out of lemonade or lemonade out of lemons in this situation. And at first I was not enthused about it because when life presents what it essentially has chosen for you in some ways, You either adopt, or you can just stay your ground. And staying your ground in that regard to me felt like just giving up and being immobilized, and that's not just who I am. So I decided, spending the whole summer just watching TV5 Monde, Channel 25 for free for 30 minutes would help me. So the next time I went back to school after the summer, I might actually know what I'm supposed to be learning in class. And I could see the difference about giving up just a little bit of my time to learn something new, how much of an impact it had on me, where I was going from a straight C to match my initial, I think at the beginning, to, what I never thought would be like A's, like in a class like that. And that's what kind of brought me to the journey to college, where, I was still taking French because you still have to take a language. I felt like I was gearing more towards an international relations career. I was like, that sounds great. That sounds so cool. Why not get a little maybe of some history in there? Maybe do a double major, French and Portuguese, just to, make it even more interesting. Didn't exist at NYU at the time. And as I was doing all of that, I realized very quickly, this is a great career path for someone who definitely has the means to survive on that salary for international relations, which I realized in my situation, while it is noble, it was not going to be the thing that could put bread on the table for me. But I said, I don't want to lose something that I love, because if you love something, you have to find your own path to seeing how you can express it. And I remember being in high school and college and trying to get through school, do all my classes, and trying to also make ends meet working in a computer lab. Because as a kid, I loved tinkering. I would soup up my computer. I would get the best 2400 BPS modem just so I can connect on AOL at the time. Being able to do that and connecting to the world, to me, was such a fascinating thing, that when the opportunity presented itself to make what I thought was a very decent, hourly salary in the working in a computer lab, I said, you know what, let me just go into that. It'll help me with my studies, pay for my textbooks and stuff. And then the more I got into it, the more I got interested in systems administration, the more I got interested in running these facilities, securing these things down. And then I leapfrogged into like network security around that time. So as I started going there, it started finding me more than I started finding it. And I found a role at NYU where I started working on basically network security. And my job was really to do development on training materials. And it stuck with me to the point that while I was there in college and I graduated from college, I decided to go to Columbia to continue work in IT in the service desk, but to help me also go to school as well. I had plans to go into a master's. But after some time, NYU called me back. I went back to network security, standing in front of audiences, training them on security, trying to make 300 people laugh about network security and feel invested in it. I could tell you, as I would have not put any bets positively in my favor in that regard. I seriously thought that was an impossible feat. But yet, having done it and repracticing and doing it so many times, I took what I learned when I studied abroad in Paris for 6 months about being in front of the classroom and presenting every single day your homework and talking to an audience and actually knowing what you're talking about, to applying that in that role at NYU and talking to an audience of 300, 500, 1,000 people in a room as if I was talking to you. And that gave me the courage, I would say the professional stamina to say, if I can do that, what else can I do?
Yeah.
And that's when I made the leap to apply outside of that domain. And that's when I found Louis Vuitton. So ergo, applying to Louis Vuitton, to be honest, up until that point, I thought knowing French was just handy for knowing when someone who may be a Francophone or a Creole speaker was talking something funny about me in the subway, and that's about it. And, having had roommates in New York after I came back from Paris, studying abroad for 6 months, I had roommates for about 10 years. And in that time in New York, I learned French in New York City,
Mhm.
in Queens. That's the first question people ask me. And ironically, I just thought it was just a good party trick. But when I applied for the job, it was the first time that I realized, hey, all of these skills, this kind of like international background, having studied abroad in France, speaking French, graduating from NYU, working a bit in Colombia, all of these different things, and having a technology background actually is a niche
Mm.
that at the time I didn't realize was unique.
Yeah, I think that's another theme, and I think other guests on the podcast have had similar journeys, although similar in the sense that you don't really anticipate where you're going, but
Yeah.
you're going in a direction, and what's leading you in that direction sometimes are capabilities, skills, attributes, passions that may feel almost like you may even undervalue them because they're so natural to you, and then you get into different kinds of companies, especially in the corporate world, and you realize that what comes easy to you actually has a high amount of value. And I think it's inspiring. I hope for people entering the job force, they have similar opportunities, and this is something that I feel incredibly blessed about. I certainly didn't envision being a CTO, being where I am maybe 20 years ago, but I was tinkering in technology as well. And that was a time when I think, you could find, a niche in many companies where you're bridging technology plus something. And I think in your case, it sounds like technology plus the ability to communicate difficult concepts across different cultures.
Mhm.
And that's something that, I think, a lot of people struggle with. But another thing I'm curious about is security, and tell me if I'm making the wrong leap here, but it feels like in a company like Louis Vuitton, protecting the brand must be paramount. So, to what degree do you operate more like a CISO than maybe what would be considered, a CTO heading up development and things like that? How is your time divided? Are you more security focused? Is that the right intuition?
I would tell you from the day that I joined the company, because of that role that I had to apply all of the knowledge that I had from the network security background day one into what I was doing, from helping us to move data centers and having to rewrite all of the firewall rules for things that apparently no one documented before me. So that's always a fun exercise. To figuring out or helping us to develop a P2P platform for payment on only our most valuable part of the business, I would say the transactional part, not only that, but the customer data as well and the client relation. All of those things that I learned in those previous roles, from PCI compliance to NIST and all of the different, let's say, frameworks, they came into play in the course of my work. A lot of the challenges, I would say, throughout the time that I've been at Louis Vuitton is that there's always one part of your brain that is always saying, dream the impossible, do that next big thing that no one's seen, and elevate the experience, wow them. But you also have that other part of your brain that says, do that carefully, do that securely, do that with enough thought to recognize that as much as we want to go to certain things, we can't compromise on other things like security, people's information, their privacy, and et cetera. And, when it comes to the brand, obviously the brand reputation is so well known that you almost feel as invested in protecting the brand identity, its client information, its relationships, as well as you would protect your own or that of your own parents or your family members. Like if they came to you as like, asking you how to use the Googles to do this, you would almost say to them, bless your heart, but let me help you to take care of it. You want to protect it because you know that some folks may have a different interpretation of what is safe and what isn't. And the way that I approach it, and I think this is great right now that we have a fantastic CISO, Davin Dart. who has definitely made it possible for us to be educated at all different levels of our organization, whether it's our contact center, manufacturing, logistics, corporate, et cetera. And we just had a great cyber month where honestly, I was just blown away with the speakers, the concepts, the ideas, the trainings. Security, as much as someone would say it's not a sexy topic, it can be fun and dynamic, especially if you know how it can apply to your own world, your own self. And we have this framework within our own organization where, to avoid things like shadow IT and et cetera, whereas projects come up, there's a set pathway everyone has to follow, working with different organizations like our finance, our procurements, our IT teams. And we funnel those things in the right channels now, as opposed to having people just come up in the middle of a meeting, say, hey, we've deployed this great thing that is awesome and it does this stuff with the client data, and sitting in the room saying, I have no idea what that is. Like those are the deer in the headlight kind of moments that I think I used to have at different points in my career, but that haven't happened because we've collaborated together to making sure that doesn't get to that point. And also making sure that we go through the right frameworks to, analyze, to understand the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability of this data, and having everyone in the room understand those concepts, different levels. I think it's one thing for me to tell someone that, it's another for them to actually self-police themselves and recognize what it is. I think that's the highest level of achievement when it comes to this topic in general. So every one of our own members of our team are ambassadors in one way, shape, or form for security. Security is not a person. It's not a CISO thing. It's a everybody thing. And while no one's perfect, I think we've put a good amount of effort to create a good amount of technical controls to prevent the oops, I just made a mistake, while reinforcing the messaging between ourselves and in a learning, teaching environment that is conducive to making sure that people think about those things in their daily life.
Just in time for ChatGPT to come and make it all even more challenging.
I have to say, I don't know when this podcast will come out, but Gemini 3, if you haven't tried that,
oh yeah,
you think that Gemini 3 is on a whole different level. I think the aliens might actually visit us now with that. That's insane. Yeah.
And it's interesting that we met at an event that was about AI and security.
Yeah.
But the question I have next is around different emerging technology, blockchain, which I don't know of any other instance that, just in a well-known company that actually utilizes blockchain in a use case that's actually in production and delivering value.
Right.
What can you tell us about that?
I think it goes to show that right from the beginning, an organization such as our own sees the problem, not just for itself, but for the industry as a whole. And when we look at Aura and you see the different companies that are involved, it's not just a LVMH thing. It's about how does one know the authenticity, the traceability of these things. I think what most folks don't realize is that even within our own organizations, knowing the provenance of supplies, materials, which artisan or craftsman did or touched something, it's actually embedded within the organization, because in the absence of those things, funny things can happen in the worst ways, where the product that you are selling to a client is about, it's really the culmination of the storytelling, of the craftsmanship of that individual, knowing where it came from, who touched it, at what step in the process, who was the owner. It's all part of the storytelling. And people assign value to an object when they understand the story behind it. And knowing all of those things and having assurances behind it, it builds not only legitimacy, but it reinstills the trust in what it is. And so much of what we do in security, the security field, is about trust. And instilling that trust, maintaining that trust, and protecting that trust is paramount to doing any single thing that we do. Because it's clear that, especially when it comes to luxury, breaking that trust it's like a Fabergé egg. For as much as you may try and you can repair it and et cetera, you will always be able to spot a true craftsman will always be able to spot the cracks,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll know that there is weakness somewhere in that, and that's not something that we take lightly. And so that's the reason why we take those extra precautions to making sure that when it comes to items, for example, diamonds and things of that nature, you and high jewelry and etc. You want to know the provenance, which hands have touched it, where has it gone, where has it been, because so much of that is what will be at the table when you meet your client and telling them the story behind that piece that they're looking at. Because I think what most people kind of lose sight when it comes to luxury, people might see luxury and say from the outside, oh, it's high dollar items, make a lot of sales, make money, all that stuff. It's not any about that. It is really about the craftsmanship, the storytelling, the meaning behind a thing. We don't just do something for the sheer will of it. We do it with thought, and it's not about volume. It's about relationships. It's not about transactions. It's about authentic connections between us and the client. And we wouldn't want to push something that they wouldn't want themselves. We're trying to provide them something that is an experiential moment.
Yeah,
and that's where you see that from that blockchain, is that is the level of trust that we've instilled in it.
It's interesting because I think for a lot of maybe our listeners, certainly different companies where I've worked, your North Star metric is usually, and it changes over time, but it might be, user adoption. Let's make it to that first stage of growth. It might be, something related to, whatever, economic unit that you're transacting.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the kinds of challenges that, being a CTO in a startup in that kind of company, it's almost like it's far more simple in a way. I mean, it's not easy, but it's really about, okay, we got this right. Now we're going to scale it up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's totally different from what you're talking about, which is you have something that's it has a history, it has a story. These are actual physical objects. So I guess, how much time do you spend on innovation in terms of like knowing your customer, and how's your team, how are your teams bringing AI to that?
I actually joked to other folks when they asked me, I think it was one of your original questions, just similar to what you've been alluding to about what are some of the insights now being in this role as a CTO, and what does that feel versus your previous role? And I said, ironically, in this role, even though the title says otherwise, it is less about technology and it is more about people. And people in the sense of the relationships, people in the sense of their expectations, and people in trying to meet their aspirations. And that's where the nexus of that intersects between the technology, the people, and the innovation. And so I make it a point that we need to make sure that the basics are there. We need to make sure the lights are on. We need to make sure our applications and our systems are doing what they're supposed to be doing. But in each person's own right, whether it's in service delivery operations, network, DEX, digital experience, and workplace, everyone has a piece of that innovation pie. And it's always about looking at what could we do to not only respond to a business need, and knowing what that business need is really about talking to your peers and understanding that it's about stepping into the real world and understanding, putting yourself in the shoes of the client, and having those experiences and being able to translate what those experiences are into a more technological way to be able to facilitate that, not artificially, but to make it conducive to that. Because again, it's not about transactions, it's more about the authentic experiences. And so every one of our team members have an innate, let's say, innovation compass, let's say, when it comes to that. And they bring those ideas to the table, and we look at that across the wider portfolio. And we divvy up the tasks, the teams to work on that. And at every stage in that process, whether it's technology, people, security, or et cetera, all of those things are taken into consideration. And I would have to say that on the whole, what I've seen come out of our offices here in New York, and of course from the larger LV Neo team, which is the IT organization within Louis Vuitton, I'm fascinated by the countless times where we have, taken these little ingredients that maybe everyone else has seen, like some cheese here, some tomato sauce there, and some flour and some water, and everyone just sees just ingredients, but we see a pizza, in that sense. And putting it together and creating something new and unique like that, and being the first to do it, is always that challenge.
Yeah.
So I could say that I've had the pleasure of having that experience happen numerous occasions, but it's about nurturing people's curiosity and giving them the ability to express themselves in that way, and basing it off of trust in both ways to get there. I think when people are given the latitude and the space to do that, and you demonstrate that you do believe in them, they are capable of doing things wildly beyond what one could even imagine.
And here's kind of a curveball question then. As you're saying this, I was thinking, like, one of the questions I like to ask people is, what's a certain, book or, essay or film or something that kind of changed your perception of things, changed how you think. And typically people talk about, something that's technical, something that's product related, something that, would be part of the canon of the CTO, library, right? But listening to what you're saying and thinking about your background, have you ever recommended like a work of fiction to people that, because if you study, I don't know, whether it's, computer science or, any technical field, again, there's a whole canon around that, and there are frameworks, and there's ways that, everyone sort of understands the world, and you can go back to first principles and say it's, laws of physics. But when it comes to telling stories, there's nothing better than fiction. I mean, that is essentially narratives. So yeah, I'm curious, what books do you recommend to your staff that are, not part of the management school?
Right. Yeah, I would say, and I've seen that with other folks in the way that they learn, that they are able to absorb, I would say, the lesson that they need to see, feel, and hear, to be inspired, to galvanize them to go into that direction. I think it's impossible for me to say to anyone, read this book and do this, or go see this film. I'm sure you'll feel that. I think to each his own what that experience will be through whatever medium it may be. I can only speak for myself. And I know that's always like the typical like corny answer, but that's true. I actually do believe in that. I know for me, the thing that really pivoted for me in terms of my career that actually led me to being, I think, to the person who I am today, in the ways in which I think, the ways in which I operate, talking to people first, putting technology aside, because that's not important. The technology is never important. It's always about people first. And then being that interpreter to understand those things, and then doing something with it in a small scale to a bigger scale. It really is, it boils down to the one or two individuals I would say in my life, one in particular, that when I had my first opportunity to apply to this role, I had applied to it and I actually had done the interview, but I still felt that I was not worthy for it. And that person later found out about it and told me, "Why didn't you tell me this? I would have coached you so well for this." I was like, all right. I want to try to get in the door first and not waste your time. And the person looked at me and said, "Okay, what's the next plan? What's the next?" And I was like, "Why are you so invested in my applying for this role?" And the person said, "Because I'm your best friend. And as your best friend, I will be your worst critic because I want to see the best for you. And I also know your worth. I know, Chris, that what you can do, that company will be blown away because you have abilities that for anyone else, you might think it might not mean something to you because you're just used to it. But for everyone else, it means the entire world. And you're just at the beginning of being able to use those skills." And until that person said that, I wouldn't have believed it Because to be honest, I was just Joe Schmo from Queens that just knew a little bit of IT and spoke 1 or 2 languages. Like, to me, that doesn't mean anything. Like, who in Queens doesn't have that on their resume? But hearing that from that person, the forthright conviction about it, I actually felt it. And while I know most people may embellish on their resumes and the rule of fake it till you make it is true for everyone, I actually felt on that regard, I undersold myself to the point that when I applied for this role and I was made the first offer, I was ready to grab it and run with it. And I went back to this person who was my coach, and he said, well, I got it. That's great. And they're like, great, refuse it. I said, what? I didn't think I would even be here. He's like, no, you have to refuse it. I was like, why? He's like, you just refuse it. That's just bad negotiation. I was like, no, I don't think you understand. I've never gotten an opportunity like this. Yeah, you can't do that. It's like, no. You're worth more than that. They need to understand that. You need to go higher. And I said, okay, well, it was nice to try. Refused the first offer. And then lo and behold, the second offer came in. I said, wow, that's insane. I've got a better offer, better title. This is great. Let's go. And he's like, nope, refuse that one too. I was like, no. I don't think you get twosies. No. You have to do it. Because if you don't know how to negotiate your own life, how can you negotiate for something as prestigious and important as Louis Vuitton? That is the test.
Yeah.
And guess what? He was right.
Yeah.
And on the second time I refused it, the third time I was offered the last offer, and I said, all right, we're good, right? Do it. But wait till Monday. And it turns out that was the best decision of my life. And it's true that was the springboard that I think set the tone, not only from the way that the company interpreted how serious I was about myself and the role itself, but that I wouldn't settle for anything less, which is part and parcel, part of the identity and the DNA of the brand. It's not just about travel. It's not just about fashion and all these other things. It's about doing something with thought and exquisite, but going to its most highest possibility of excellence and doing that and applying that to oneself. Even if you think that everyone's telling you it's impossible, only you hold the cards to do that. And I think, there's a French phrase that says, quand on veut, on peut. When you want to, you can. And even in failure, there is success in that you tried. And so I felt for me, that was the turning point in my career. And that's what I try to instill to everyone, which is why we're able to push the envelope so many times on innovation because of that mindset.
So was day one daunting?
Yes. Because it turns out day one, the first thing that I embellished maybe a little bit on the network side. And the first job I had to do was configure the switch and send it. We need to send it immediately today because we have a pop-up opening up in San Francisco tomorrow. I was like, great, this is wonderful. Everyone left me Cisco 3560 switch on the table with the power cord. And I said, okay, great. Grab my keyboard, move my monitor over. And I was like, all right, where do I plug the keyboard in the screen? Where do I get the GUI? And it was shortly after that, I was like, oh, this is not going to work at all. And a couple of YouTube videos later, turns out I'm actually not so bad on actually setting up a switch. But it taught me that in today's world, to go back to your original question, the way that information is so democratized, the way it's so accessible, especially now with what we're doing in the age of AI, it really is a matter of being able to go out and find the information for yourself and doing something with it. And that comes from having a vision. When I was a kid, I came from humble means and grateful for everything my parents gave me. But if I wanted something, I had to build it through Legos. If I wanted a Super Nintendo, Legos. If I wanted Sega Genesis, Legos. That's what my mom always told me. So I had to build it myself. And so you could almost see the house that you were building or the car you're building in the Legos, and you took any piece that you could to make it happen. Mm-hmm. And so for the same way that as a childhood, I could see that, I do that today. And I can see what will be. And I just need to figure out together, collectively with our teams, co-creating that. It's not about me. It's not about anyone. It's co-creating that vision that as long as we share that same vision together, as long as it responds to a need, we're able to build that strategy together. And everyone has a voice and a say in that, in the tactics by which we achieve that. And that honestly is one of the greatest rewards when you see the crowning achievement, when you've built that house, whatever it may be.
Well, and if you create a space where people can actually do that in an authentic way. And I think part of what you're saying too is, in my first job, my first supervisor said to me something very, very wise, that I bring with me everywhere, which is not everyone shows up to work for the same reasons.
That's true. That's true.
Multiple reasons, or you may or may not agree with Elon Musk on a lot of things, but one thing he says about companies, and I'll paraphrase it, is that it's about getting all the vectors in the right direction. Every person is a vector going in a direction, and how do you channel that? How do you align that? So how do you do that? Is there something? What sort of tricks or tools do you use to get that alignment with your teams, to do that kind of co-creation?
I mean, sometimes you just have to buy them lunch. That helps a lot. But I would say, one of the techniques that I've done together is, there's a time where you have a vision in your mind, but only you see it. And the approach that we have collectively is to, at a very rudimentary level, just show a roadmap, a very simple one. Literally, it looks just like an Excel, just some squares, and just talk about the different streams and what those streams are. What do they end up being at the end to achieve? And designating who is going to be running that portfolio, your management team, and who within their team are going to have the voice that's going to be able to carry that stream to its fullest conclusion. Because by stringing all of those things together and doing it in sequence, everyone sees the same thing. Every 2 weeks to a month, we sit down, we look at that roadmap, and we never lose sight of it. We look at making sure that we're on target, that we're achieving it, and we're giving each other signals when I'm going to be delayed. You need to go ahead faster to catch up, make up the difference. But it's more like working as a team in kind of like a relay race to making sure that whatever thing that requires the other one, we're letting each other know. And that kind of synchronized collaborative work, it actually builds and instills in the folks the importance of what it is that they're delivering. I think that for individuals to really achieve some of that greatness in any of the things that we do, if they can answer the 5 whys as to why they're doing it, why they're delivering this, why are they, and they know it in and out, then achieving that vision together is as easy as walking down the street, because everyone's instilled and invested in it. They have to see as much of themselves in it as they do as well the solution. So I feel like having that co-ownership, that co-vision of that entire, let's say roadmap, whatever it may be, it has a rewarding sense that when it comes to manifest itself, like when we did our Fifth Avenue store, and it's like one of the first ones that's on a POS platform that, we worked very hard, working fully in the cloud, iPads in the store, and replacing big clunky POS systems. It actually came, ironically, from just one idea that we had. And it said, what if we could, instead of building these clunky devices, we could create a space that today it might be a POS. Tomorrow it might just be you and I sitting together, having a nice conversation, sitting right there while I show you maybe some wedding bands for your future marriage, or showing you the handbag that you're going to present to your daughter for her birthday. Being able to reuse that space to create those connections and those experiences is the vision. How do you get there? And it came about that we had to completely break everything that we did and redo it completely differently just to achieve that one single experience. So we can talk about how much square footage we saved in terms of whatever, how much selling floor square footage space we regained. All of that's true, but it's about that experience now. We're making it about the client, not about the technology.
And it's a physical experience.
It's a physical experience, yeah.
Yeah, which is something that I guess in a purely technocratic way, people would think that that's on the decline.
Yeah.
But it's not.
It's not. No, I think if anything, in the age of social media and doom scrolling, I think folks, surprisingly, if they are given a taste of a true experiential moment that is different than what they've come to know and come to accept, if it's done with enough thought and care and personalized, it will motivate them more to go towards that direction. You see that in the way that post-pandemic travel has exploded, because I think people had a different sense of appreciation of time is short. life is short. Go out and enjoy it. And there is a time and place for the acquiescence of, let's say, of, luxury items that have a story, that have a meaning, and that are done with thought. And being able to juggle between that and the experiences, especially when you can combine both, is also, I think, for me, I see it as a novel approach to how do you answer that? How do you create a connection with someone and avoid making it transactional? So I see that people, again, they just feel disconnected, even though they're more connected. And people are still looking for that connection through different means. And it's our job to inspire them to find that connection.
Well, it's interesting too, because it's when I think about, and particularly watching my kids when they get into the brain rot cycle, and there's anxiety there.
Yeah.
But what you're describing is sort of the antithesis of anxiety. It's rich. It's something that you can't digest quickly. It's not something you take a 7-second hit. It's you go, you sit down, you experience it. It's inspiring, and I think one thing that I think about a lot with AI and automation, and where things are. You could say there's a direction that feels inevitable, that I don't believe is inevitable myself, towards greater and greater automation of things, and kind of removing the human in the loop. But at the end of the day, we're not making products for AIs. We're making products for humans. We're still, human preference is what determines, whether someone buys something. You can only automate so much of experiences. So I will gladly outsource my research to ChatGPT or whatever foundation model can tell me where the best value hotels are in Porto or someplace. But I don't want necessarily an agent to book my flight necessarily. I may want to look at the seat map. I may want a window seat for that trip against my what might be my normal pattern. I guess this affirms kind of that intuition that ultimately, as long as there are humans, we're going to be making experiences for humans.
Yeah, I agree. I would have to say that I think, again, of course, we all know we're in an era where these are the things that maybe in our childhood days we would imagine. And of course, when we say imagine, in the way that we saw it, there would definitely be flying cars for sure. And we'd be in the era of like the Jetsons or something beyond that. And yet here we are in our lifetimes witnessing it happening, and it's going faster than we can actually keep up with. And I question whether the same effect that social media had on, youth and just people in general, if the same will hold true with these kind of AI technologies. I think there's something to be said that I've seen this terminology. I think it's called like AI psychosis, where the affirmative, let's say, or the affirmations that you get from these AI tools can lead one to believe that the impossible really is possible. And that may be true in a broader sense, but there are certain things that, 2 + 2 must equal 4. And yet it might convince you otherwise because it's found some loophole somehow. And people making decisions off of that, I guess the hallucinations or this, let's say, enthusiastic response, is where society has to learn to retrain its mind and the way we look at things. It will also build greater distrust to a certain extent, because as people start to see video content coming out of Sora and start to see the next level of what, right now, even with Gemini, I could see that some of these PowerPoint decks are amazing that it's making, but, someone who's in a CEO room watches someone present one of those PowerPoints, they question, did you even read this and do it? Could it be right or wrong? Who knows? There is going to be a time where people are starting to question the validity of anything. And even the things that are valid, people will question, and it kind of does the opposite of what it is that you wanted to do. Much in the same way that social media was meant to bring us more together, and yet it has the inverse
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah.
Right. So I think we're still in a state of flux with it. And I think as a human society, it will take some time for us to learn, adopt, and adapt. I think what will be more interesting is understanding that the provenance of that information, who is feeding any of these tools, and if people are instilling so much of their trust in it, how what will be the breakpoint moment where you don't sense hallucinations, you don't sense a fake image or etc. You really truly believe it, but in and of itself, it is information that is benefiting some other party. And the last part of that is that I look at AI and wonder in the back of my mind, here it is, all of us feeding it. But at what point, will someone come and be able to exploit that, or at least fingerprint us to know what our preferences are, what our tastes, where we are, etc., to be able to do different things, some malicious, some benign. But I think at a certain point with any CRM tool, we could tell something about our own clients. But this is a whole different level, because this delves between professional, the personal, the intimate, and it's all somehow in this platform, and it knows things about you that you probably may not even know about yourself. So there is a concern about using these tools. How many breadcrumbs or fingerprints of you are you leaving out there that someone may be benefiting from?
Yeah. No, I think, well, it reminds me of, there's a New York Times article a long time back, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. The author, I forget who wrote it, but basically said, look, here's the password to all my bank accounts. You might as well have them, because it's not a question of if, but when.
Right.
There's something in that, something there, what you're describing. If I train an LLM to, write something in my voice, then I'm kind of, making it entirely possible for someone to impersonate me very easily. And then there's sort of the other side of this is, the more content we generate, that, and I've used this example before. I wrote a 30-page business plan, 2 minutes, right? So I could
only in 2 minutes. Yeah, it's a little slow, no?
It was right. I took a couple prompts, but that could go to a bunch of investors somewhere, and they're going to synthesize it and get some kernel from that. That's reduced down to whatever that thought is. So I just wonder, it's going to be compression, expansion, and compression, expansion, and compression. Are we actually going to communicate something different? And that's where I think understanding how people communicate, I think speaking and understanding different languages, I think is, I'm very lucky that my children, we've raised them bilingual. I think that's going to be a superpower.
Right.
It continues to be. It has been, but it continues to be, and especially how we're changing how we communicate with AI. Maybe that'll be the way that people, truly detect the human underneath in the future, is having that capacity.
Yeah, I would tell you your Spanish skills are almost like inhuman. So I learned outside of this podcast, this is how we kind of connected, that this man speaks perfect Argentinian Spanish, which is absolutely insane.
Ha sido un gran placer.
Igualmente. But yeah, I would say, if we're going to close, I would say you're right. Language, I think, is, for me, it's been the most unique experience, because I find that when you talk someone else's language, you build connection.
Yeah.
And that connection is a springboard to the next best thing. And I think we're in an era right now with AI where this is all great. These things do wonderful things, but at the end of the day, it's just a calculator. I think it's a very souped up calculator. If you know the right formula, you can do something. But where it really matters is having the creativity or the knowledge about how to apply that, when and where, is where I think we need to learn as a society how to use it for the benefit. The same way that I'm sure maybe your own family or children, when they see you, they may speak in Spanish, but if someone else unknown comes in, they switch to English. They contextualize the situation. They just automatically know it, and they know to adapt to the situation. I think that right now we're in that phase where we're here learning a new language, and at some point we will learn to adapt and adopt it in the right ways at the right time. So it's okay for us to, crawl, walk, run with this kind of stuff. But eventually, I think we'll be proficient enough to be able to use it with the right level of creativity, injecting our experiences, our knowledge, to actually make it do the things that even today we have not the most fathomable clue that is actually possible for tomorrow. And that's really where I think that will be the pivot point where I see that next revolution, I would say, or evolution in the human development will start to happen. Hopefully it will be done with grace and for the good.
And it's probably coming next week.
Yes, we'll see.
Okay, this has been great. Thank you very much.
Thank
you. Yeah, until the next one.
All right. Thank you.
Nos vemos.
Nos vemos. Ciao.
This was it for this episode. Join us next time for more real-world conversations between technology leaders. And if you like what you heard, subscribe to CTO2CTO. See you soon.